Good afternoon and good morning to everyone who's joined us from overseas. As always, we're just going to allow a minute to let everyone settle in, grab their coffee and get ready for today's webinar. So welcome on a gloomy day in the UK, but I'm sure it's nice and sunny in Florida. We have today one of my favourite webinars, actually. We run these on a yearly basis with Strada. And I think for those of you that are a bit geeky like me, we like to know all about the complexities of payroll. So today's webinar is about unlocking payroll possibility, how the 2025 Global Payroll Complexity Index uncovers a pivotal moment for payroll transformation. So not only is it interesting, it's an important webinar with some really key information for all payroll leaders. So just before we start, I'd just like to hear from the audience. If you can let me know where you've dialed in from today. Again, that's another geeky part that I love seeing where people come from. I know sometimes we get people from Australia or the Philippines, which is super late for you guys. We've got Alberta, Canada. Thank you, Veronica, and the UK. Oh, there you go. They're all coming in now, so it's great to see so many of you from everywhere. If you do have any questions, if you can put them in the chat, that'd be great. And at some point during today's webinar, JP and Christian will answer those. So let me introduce you to today's speakers, or experts, shall I say. So,
yeah, thank you, Melanie. I'm Christian Keller. It's great to be with you all today. As Melanie mentioned, I'm here in not so gloomy Miami, Florida, in the United States. I'm happy to be joining you guys. And as it says on the slide, I lead our solution architect group here, so helping clients craft their global payroll strategies, getting their systems, processes, people, technology all aligned. And I've been with Strada for, 13 years now, all in global payroll. JP, maybe have you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Christian. So, Jan-Peter Jansen, JP in short. I'm based out of Amsterdam. I don't know what the weather over there is because I'm sitting in our Frankfurt office and I can tell you it's snowing there. So I'm crossing my fingers that I have my flight tonight back. Over 10 years with Strada, and I'm responsible for the Germany, Switzerland, Austria, France, Luxembourg, Italy, Spain, Portugal. So quite a few of those countries that we will see back in our global complexity index. So looking forward to this webinar and to share with you what we have at least learned out of this survey. So perhaps I can go on and talk about the agenda that we have for you guys today. So first of all, we will talk about what the 2025 Global Payroll Complexity Index is about. Besides that, then what we found as the key findings to share today with you. And basically to take a different view of the world and basically take a look through the possibility lens and looking from complexity to clarity. And at the end, then Christian and myself will share some closing remarks and hopefully you have something back on board to take it forward. So that's the agenda that we have laid out for you today in the hour to come. With that in mind, perhaps it's a good idea to have a very short summary on introducing Strada as an organization. So for me, if I would describe it, and you guys can read yourself, but we are a leader that basically simplifies the international workforce management with our people, with our payroll, with our technology. So we design and deliver people-first solutions. Those are powered by market-leading cloud-based technologies. And with that, we help organizations to grow, enable workforce to perform at their best, and we do that over more than 180 countries. So in short, we are the experts in payroll, from advising, managing and delivering services to global payroll platform and payment processing. Whether you operate in a single country, just in a few countries around the world, or you operate all over the world, you've got you covered. That's for sure as Strada. So having said that, I think, Christian, back to you. Let's start with the Global Payroll Complexity Index.
Yeah, sure. So what are we all here to talk about, review, share some, best practices and what we're hearing in the ecosystem in the market today. So what is the Strada Global Payroll Complexity Index? So this is the seventh year that we've done this, and I think some of you may be familiar with this and saying, well, didn't you start this back in like 2011? We publish this biannually. So every 2 years, there's a new version of this that gets published. That's just the cycle of how we do our research and surveys and everything else of our customers and and the markets and everything else. So this is the seventh edition. It's kind of reaffirming the position. It's the industry's original, most trusted benchmark for global payroll complexity, and it's been recognized across the globe over these past seven editions, the past 14 years or so. We continue to set the standard for understanding just the very intricate landscape of payroll operations and doing it on a global scale across the world. You'll see in our report the top 40 countries reflected, although we do research across the whole globe. And we'll kind of focus in on the 10 most complex markets today. We'll get to that in a little bit here. So let me just pause and talk a little bit about why is this important, right? So yes, it's a survey, covers the whole globe, talks about complexity, but really this is important, and where I see customers and payroll departments deriving value from this is it provides insights. Regulations are consistently evolving, and compliance is something that is a marathon, not a sprint. We're always having to stay in compliance and keep up with regulatory updates on the global level, the regional level. Think about the European pay transparency directive is one that's front of mind for many of us right now, and just helping to mitigate the risks of all these changing dynamics as they continue to go. One of the trends we've seen, fortunately, is complexity is somewhat stabilizing in terms of the velocity of change, but still consistently something we have to keep up with as payroll professionals. Another thing is identifies opportunities for process improvements, right? So there's always something to be doing in payroll, whether it's running your payroll or checking and doing your audits. But there's consistently ways we can take a step back and maybe look at some of the insights in this report and say, is there areas that we could look at what we're doing today, whether it's locally, regionally, or globally, and say maybe there's a way we could manage and streamline some of our processes better, and maybe there's some cost savings that come along with that. That's something that I think is consistently a theme, especially with AI and productivity gains being top of mind for a lot of CEOs and CFOs. How can we streamline things and maybe bring some cost savings into the mix as part of that is something that this report may help identify. Benchmarks, right? So how is my payroll? If I'm having a particularly difficult time in one region, one country, is it because of the complexity itself? Is there, or maybe something behind the scenes with my processes that are somewhat out of line with maybe what other customers or other organizations are doing? So it helps with a benchmark, right? To understand, hey, maybe it validates. I'm having a really tough time in this country because of so many different changing rules, regulations. Data privacy is another theme that comes up often, but helps set a benchmark. It helps you understand where do I sit, where does my company and my payroll sit relative to maybe some of my peers or to other organizations within the countries that I also operate in. So it just helps to validate what you guys are seeing and experiencing and feeling, frankly, as you're running payrolls globally. And the last thing is it's proactive management, right? So this gives you a view into the trends, what is driving the complexity, what's driving changes in the market today, and helps you be a little more proactive to say, okay, we see some things that are coming down the pike, whether it's legislation, whether it's new rules, new requirements that may come through, maybe changes in the workforce or changes in data privacy. All these themes, again, all hit payroll at the end of the day, whether it's upstream in your HR or downstream on your tax and accounting and finance organization. And so it helps you be a little more proactive, less reactive. As payroll professionals, we're always hit with something new, and we're always have something else that's coming down the pike and hitting our payroll. And so it helps you kind of look around the corner, see what those challenges might be, and get ahead of some of the optimizations that could really help make your life and in your company's life and your employees' lives a little bit simpler and easier. So with that, JP, I think we want to start our poll and just get a sense from you all of what's going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and I'm really looking forward, Christian, to see what the feedback is from the audience here, is how complex they see their current payroll landscape. And I remember from previous years that the teams were in general looking at the very complex. So I'm very curious about how this is going to work out this time. So looking forward.
Can I ask you guys which what do you think is going to be the winner on this one?
I would expect, to be honest, like last time, very complex. That will be the winner. That's normally. But let's see if there's kind of consistency across the last couple of years, Melanie.
Yeah, Christian, what do you think?
I'm in the somewhat to vary. Again, we're seeing a little bit of stabilization as some of these, regulations come in line. So maybe compared to years past where there was a little more uncertainty, maybe it's starting to stabilize. But I agree with JP. There's still a lot of complex payroll. I'll speak for the North America lens. It seems to get more complex by the year for us. So
Yeah. Okay, so I have my magic percentage. If you haven't answered, we're gonna just leave it for a few more seconds. So if you haven't answered, if you could now, I would be really grateful, because it's good to get a good understanding of how the audience feels. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now. Thank you for whoever's just answered. Thanks. Okay, so JP, the same.
I'm glad there's consistency, Melanie, in the webinars that we've done around the Global Payroll Complexity Index. But it is indeed, if you take 97%, either thinks it is very or somewhat complex, which is kind of incredible, right?
Yeah, interesting. I'm going to stop sharing now. Okay.
Thanks, Melanie. It also tells me we've got true payroll professionals on the call here, because if anyone tells you payroll is not at all complex, they're probably not running payroll. That's my experience. So,
or they just shared a wish.
exactly, aspirational. Yeah. So let's talk about the report itself, right? What is the summary? What's changed, from our research done in 2025? So overall, as I mentioned, we're not seeing very large swings, or as large of swings as we've seen in the past years, but complexity does continue to rise marginally, right? So looking at about 5% across the globe. It shows that there's still demands on payroll teams, and those are pretty intense, right? So it's not that the past years of complexity have gone away, right? We're still seeing year-over-year increases in this. But that means there's a big opportunity for recognizing this complexity early, managing it effectively, and you can reduce the risk that it presents, right? We know complexity is there. We know it's increasing still, even if it's marginal. And so I think having that awareness that we all just acknowledged in our poll just means, hey, that means we know things are going to come our way, and we can be proactive and planful and manage that. One interesting area that we noted, you can see sharp increases for both Japan and for Mexico. So Mexico, is close to where I live, and we've seen significant complexity there. Mostly around things like it's already a very calculation-heavy payroll, but it's fiscal compliance now, Social Security rules. For those that operate in Mexico, there's the CFDI XMLs. So that's the tax filings that you remit with the government. Once those are stamped and reported to, the tax agency, SAT, even like a small minor correction, even if it, might seem de minimis, that requires a cancellation of the workflow. You get strict deadlines, and it turns just one, maybe what could seem like a simple change into a broader compliance exercise. So there's also changes that happen with terminations and variable pay. There's a very complex, severance model in Mexico, for example, that you have to take into account seniority premiums, proportional benefits, your tax exempt thresholds, and sometimes, organizations may be managing a global severance process, have to do last minute recalculations when you take into some of these local requirements in Mexico. And then I think for many of you, especially if there's anyone from the finance organization or treasury, the banking dispersions and the funding approvals drive operational complexity. So, having to have a local bank account in Mexico, for example, that's driven a significant amount of complexity. Just, getting money to employees, right? There's one thing calculating payroll, but then that last mile of getting actual money to employees' bank accounts is another challenge as well. So there's regulatory complexity that's existed for a while in Mexico, but we're now seeing it spill into some of the operations as well. And then Japan is the other one, right? We saw a significant spike, 41% for Japan. And that's because Japan's payroll is complex by nature, right? There's income tax, there's a resident tax, there's local tax. You have obviously social insurance contributions, as we see across the globe. But those income tax rules have different, employee-specific factors like family status, income, employment type, right? Your full-time versus your foreign workers. So there's complexity there with some of the tax, right? That we've seen, and it continues to be there and present in front of mind for us. Seasonal bonuses are another tricky thing in Japan. You have your regular salary that's taxed a certain way, but then there's a completely separate tax withholding kind of method and calculation, and a separate social insurance treatment in terms of those contributions when it comes to a seasonal bonus. So sometimes you have to have almost a separate kind of payroll calculation and a validation process when you're processing that versus just a regular salary payroll. And then year-end adjustments in Japan as well. So we're seeing tax adjustments becoming, more complex year over year. There's a comprehensive calculation of employees' annual salary, the bonuses I just mentioned, the taxes, the social insurance companies, and having to recalculate taxes based on the family information for an employee and the various deductions that come along with that. Maybe it's a spousal deduction, some of those insurance premiums I mentioned. There's, the process requires some careful handling of different tax discrepancies, making sure, correct tax refunds or payments get made along the way as those adjustments get made in the payroll. So seeing significant complexity in those two regions in particular year over year. And of course, JP, Europe continues to be one of the leading regions for complexity, and a lot of past complexity has not gone away, particularly with the pay transparency derivative and initiative coming up. So maybe you can speak a little bit about what's going on in EMEA as well.
Yeah. So I'm the lucky one, because if you take a look to the top 7 of the 10 spots, most of them sits in my market. So sometimes I think that EMEA, Europe has invented complexity. But what you see today is, you already mentioned that the EU Pay Transparency Directive is already impacting today the way we have to look at the whole payroll side of the house, and how organizations need to prepare for that and making it work. So that's where we see a lot of emphasis and a lot of organizations trying to deal with that. On the other side, and that is across many markets in Europe, is that the requirements around reporting for social security purposes in general and more, that to me is one of the big hurdles today that people are dealing with in terms of complexity. And what you see is sometimes you would wish that Europe was one Europe, because then every country would do the same thing, but that's of course not the reality. And what you see in that is that where countries are picking up that whole reporting requirements and putting their directives in place, they don't start from an automation perspective. They start with very much manual processes inside, and that means much more manual work on the teams and much more efforts to be done. And then later on, what you see is that then the governments realize that the manual work is not very helpful, and then they start to think about how can we automate and digitalize that. So what we will see is that the complexity remains there to be in place, but I think there will be again a shift from more manual work to back again more digitalization. But yeah, it is an interesting spot to be in.
Yeah, definitely.
So you have in the US a big jump, man. That also is surprising.
That's right. It's been interesting. We're starting to catch up with you, JP, with our own complexity here. And there's always been a certain amount of complexity in the United States, right? For those that process payroll there, you have your federal, your state, your local, different tax regimes, right, between your federal income tax, state income tax, unemployment tax, et cetera. But what we're seeing is more mandatory deductions, particularly on the state and local levels. We're seeing federal legislation as well. There was a large reconciliation bill that was passed last year that had some retroactive benefits. That some of them were implemented in terms of tax changes, income tax changes of 2026, but there was also an impact to 2025 that caused some payroll departments to have to scramble to understand and implement, some of those changes. Changing the tax regimes for overtime, for tips, and for other payments, also has an impact. And then there's, again, continuing to be varying different state rules and regulations and local rules and regulations around this. Each state has its own tax rules, wage laws, compliance obligations. Some states are now venturing into, data privacy. California obviously is one that comes to mind for those that have any employees and have run their payrolls there. But even small details like local wage thresholds, which can happen in some of the, bigger cities in the United States, overtime rules, as I've mentioned, those can have pretty big financial and compliance implications. And, some of those can impact systems, not just on payroll, but hit payroll at the end of the day, right? Your time calculations and your time and labor and absence systems, et cetera, and making sure that those are calculating correctly if that's where the time's evaluated, and then feeding into payroll. Again, just adds further complexity as you look at that at the state and local and even the city level at sometimes. So for the United States in particular, We saw 17% rise in complexity. We're now in the top 10 for the first time. And again, as I look at kind of where that's been driven, a lot of it's been legislation at the federal level, as I mentioned, the reconciliation bill, but also at the state level. California, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois. These are all states that have always had complexity, but we're just seeing more and more across all these different spans and layers as we think about privacy, taxation, labor laws, overtime laws, et cetera. Even when you look at the pay slips, right? So Oregon is one example where we see very complex requirements of what needs to be displayed on a pay slip. And we're seeing other states starting to move in that direction as well. So employees can better understand what they're paid, how they're compensated and rewarded, et cetera. But adds further complexity, obviously, to us as payroll professionals. So those are typically among the most complex ones. And so it's not all bad news, I'll say. JP, I don't know if you've seen anything in Europe. I know we saw some decreases in Sweden, but the other thing I'll say is there are some places where, due to digitalization, we're actually seeing some reductions in complexity. Places like China and Hong Kong, for example, have made pretty significant advances in their digitization of being able to remit things and file things more timely and easily. The Philippines, for example, has relaxed some of their requirements as it relates to optional, deductions and timekeeping, time and absence management, et cetera. And in the Middle East, a highly digitized area, you think of United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, highly digital, very simple tax regimes relative to the rest of the world. So again, not all bad news out there in the world. There are some places where we're seeing complexity overall going down. JP, I don't know if you've seen any observations from yours as well. But...
Yeah, same in Europe. Some countries are truly making the investment to do on the digitalization side of the house, and with that automating the complexity, which helps enormously and reduces also the number of errors and challenges that you have from a payroll exclusive perspective. But at the same time, what we see is that other countries now are starting more or less with the same requirements around social security reporting, all the data transfers that need to happen. And they all start off more or less from the angle of, let's do a manual process more first, and then we will see the digitalization. So while we solve a little bit from one, we get another one in place. But I think the intent overall is much more around, let's see if we can do more digitalization, more automation, with that reducing the complexity and the workload on the business side of the house. So yeah, a good trend, still steps to be made.
Exactly. So with that, drum roll, please, JP. I think we'll take it to the top 10 countries. Let's see where's the complexity?
Yeah. So if I take a look to the complexity that we always see is, of course, it starts always with France. France is always the one that is still there, and that probably will never change. If you take the number of rules that we have there, the number of different allowances, number of data that we need to maintain as payroll expert in that, and what comes with that, the complexity and regulation, it's always there. I think I would say the big surprise I found in the whole survey is that Slovakia jumped on from place 10 to place 2, and with that, we went like, okay, what is driving that complexity? And then very rapidly you see that there's a new regional social security rules put in place, which is putting an enormous amount of data requirements to it. And that means, as I said, manual processes, lots of workloads, and with that, enormous amount of complexity. So that doesn't make the world simpler on that one. Another country to cover in Europe before I go back to you for a second is Switzerland. In the chat, there was Ruth mentioning to say, hey, Germany perhaps less complex than you might expect. Switzerland is very complex, and the answer is absolutely yes. If you take a look in terms of not only it is because the regulation itself, but the fact that you have the cantons, the areas within the country that have their own legislation, their own rules, their own desires in terms of how they want to get reported, how they have the rules set up, makes it even if it's a single country, it doesn't behave like that. And then the language requirements, because yes, you have those many, there's French, Italian, German, or Swiss, how you want to describe it, as language requirements doesn't help either. So Switzerland is a good other one to touch on in terms of part of the top 10. But you hold a few one as well with Canada and, as you mentioned, the United States. Perhaps you want to elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, exactly. And the language requirement's not lost on me as well, right? That's part of what drives a lot of the complexity in Canada, is, the language complexity for those that operate in Montreal, for example, having to have, not just your, all of your documentation, your tax receipts, everything else for the MRQ in Quebec, in French Canadian, and not French, by the way, French Canadian, but also employee support, right? If employees have questions or answer, need support, having that be driven specifically in French Canadian, drives a lot of complexity for those clients that operate in Quebec in Canada. I did want to touch briefly on Australia, because there was significant movement of this. In our last survey, Australia was in the 11th spot. And as you can see on our map here of complexity, they're now third. So it's 21% rise in their total score. They went from around a 6 up to a 7, greater than a 7, 7.25 almost. And it reflects just quite a few mandatory deduction changes, reporting requirements, so having multiple organizations needing to access, different sides of the payroll data, and then kind of expansion of varied payment methods. So we're seeing Australia as well, historically not an easy payroll, especially as you look at the superannuation and some of the retirement and benefits requirements. But we're seeing rising complexity there due to, again, just data access, reporting requirements, et cetera, and different regimes happening in Australia. But to your point, JP, I've covered a lot of these complexities I talked about in the United States, and I'm seeing some reflection in our chat here, recognizing that the United States, finally made it to the top 10. And I'll say as an employee here and as someone who's lived in multiple states and worked in multiple states, I do think it's an acknowledgement that the complexity is, here to stay, I think, for the United States and Canada. One thing that Rahul mentioned in the chat, and thank you, Rahul, for your contribution, is benefits, health benefits, dental, vision, and all kinds of other benefits that sometimes hit payroll. For those that maybe aren't as familiar with the United States, there are some benefit programs that employers have where even your home insurance, your auto insurance gets taken out of your paycheck as deductions and then funded to those various insurance agencies. So thank you for bringing that up. Rahul, that and also the paid family leave regulations, Secure 2.0. I mean, there's a lot of things that are coming online right now for the United States. And again, you multiply that across all 50 states, the territories, the localities that are within each of those states. Puerto Rico has its own entire, different regime in terms of taxation. So yeah, there's a lot of complexity that I think we're starting to acknowledge here in the United States. And then, as I mentioned, Canada has always been, in our top 10. They've always had a decently complex payroll. They've held steady, but there's continuing to have rising reporting expectations. And again, seeing some of the additional complexity that's driven there by the provincial requirements. That's also continues to kind of not go away and be a driver of complexity for payroll. So JP, I think with that, I'll hand it back to you, and maybe we can talk through some of the other countries in Europe there in the last back half of the top 10.
Absolutely. So one of the countries that I always like to touch on is Poland, for example. Number 7 in the top 10. And if I take a look at Poland in terms of the requirements that they have around the data that needs to be shared, how much data, especially for tax authorities, social security authorities, but many other types of data, more I would say probably more than many other countries in Europe, and that doesn't fade away. It keeps on being there, and they continue to see that there's more complexity introduced because of the stricter rules around the payslip, more and more rigorous data fields requirements in terms of data that needs to be shared. So Poland remains to be solid into the top 10 and not disappearing yet as much. But if you take a new one there that entered into the top 10, Czechia, they introduced completely new mandatory deductions that is not helpful in simplifying your the payroll, and with that, quite some organizations had to make quite some steps to catch up and to make sure that they cover that complexity that they have in place now today. On the other side, also, there's a much tighter view on how time tracking is placed related to the payroll side of the house, and all the controls that comes with that, and with that also to more creativity around the payment types that we are looking at, that is heading the organizations. With that, what you see is a much higher complexity from a payroll landscape in Czechia. That said, at the same time, and I think it was already in the chat also, that around Germany you see a little bit slowing down in terms of complexity. I think the level of automation left and right is definitely there. What you see is that the complexity varies very much also by industry and the tariffs, how that has been defined. But what they do have as a complexity still, and it was also highlighted, is indeed how you deal with absence management and how you transform that back into the payroll, and what does that mean for the individual. But there are a couple of things there in Germany that are still complex, but at least they didn't increase from a complexity perspective. So at least not all my markets is getting significantly in that direction. And perhaps to the round off Turkey as the number 10, that is more or less steady. I haven't seen that significant change. The level of complexity is still there. If I take a look in terms of how we deal with that from where I sit, is not necessarily something very specific in terms of very procedural, very process oriented, what you have to follow. And with that, at the same time, there's opportunities then also to get smarter about how you deal with those processes and how you deal with those more procedural requirements. So I think we have some big changes, but overall, there's also a kind of trend that I think some pieces are going to be simplified and a little bit easier compared to what we have seen in the past.
And JP, just want to respond to a couple of things in the chat here. I think, I can cover a little bit about the methodology we use for the report. I'm seeing, some comments about Spain, for example. And I did want to let everyone know, so we will provide, the resources. You can actually see this report yourself, provide that at the conclusion of our call here. But if I look at the difference between, call it Germany and Spain, for example, it's like less than 0.2% of a point. So making it into the top 10 versus the next 10 below that, it's a very, very fine difference in terms of what the ranking is. Spain was a 6.25 and Belgium was a 6.28, for example. So we're talking about the hairs here between the 11th and 12th spot. Still significant complexity, and I think across a lot of Europe, significant complexity remains, and we're just seeing a little bit less in terms of the spikes year over year of increases, but still significantly complex. I saw another comment in the chat about India. That is in our top 40 countries. They're actually in the top, they're 21st actually, so almost in the top 20 countries for us as well. So again, complexity is certainly not exclusive to any particular region, the United States, Canada, North America, nor EMEA. It's fractions of percentage points here in terms of how the rankings all stacked up. And we'll provide those rankings to everyone and show you how you can get access to the report after the call. Anything you'd add on that point, JP?
No, so I think I saw that as well, and Italy is indeed always one of those more complex countries as well. But what you see with Italy, indeed, that there are some very specific requirements that make it complex. But if you take a look in terms of the respondents that we did get, it didn't get to that same weight factor. But it doesn't say it's not complex, and I think that is definitely what I would like to share is to say, if I take a look to Europe, including Italy, including Belgium, it's not simple at all. Definitely not. Just a different way how people have looked at it and weighted it.
Absolutely. And I'll just, for sake of clarity for everyone, again, we'll provide the full report to you, but in terms of the variables that we look at, right? What's the methodology behind our report? Things we look at are the number of data fields required to run your payroll in that particular country, or even, within that particular region or province or state of that country. So it's the number of data fields for processing, for reporting. What are the number of mandatory deductions and allowances? Maybe those are mandatory allowances or optional allowances. What kinds of mandatory reporting is required, and what is the frequency of that reporting, right? Is it a periodic, so every time you process a payroll, or is it a monthly? And that gets into some of the pay frequencies as well for white collar and blue collar. And then payslip requirements is another one. What has to be listed on the payslip and where, and what are the fines associated with that, and what's the risk and potential costs associated with some of those. And then obviously legal changes, right? And digitization. Those are some big things that, again, as we see complexity come down in certain places like Sweden, for example, or in China, Hong Kong, and Singapore, which already has a very much digitized kind of automated system. Those are the kinds of the areas that we look at. And so there's a broad kind of swath of data points that we use. We weight them slightly differently, but it's everything from time tracking regulations to wage reporting and labor reporting, to the taxes, to the digitization. It's kind of everything involved with not just processing the payroll, but also the post-payroll activities that have to happen after the fact, and your year-end processes as well around each of these payrolls. So hopefully that helps shed a little bit of clarity on kind of how we do these assessments. And again, just acknowledgement, these are very, very close in terms of complexity. There's a lot of complexity in payroll across the globe. So with that, JP, I think we'll get into a little bit of a discussion, right, of kind of what are some of those trends and what to do with some of the things we've been talking about here. So that's all right, JP. Maybe I'll just start with asking you this question. If payroll wants to take advantage of all this complexity we're talking about, rather than trying to eliminate it, because it's not something you can do if a government is mandating this or certain laws and regulations mandate it. So rather than trying to eliminate it, what steps can you take to learn from it and take action decisively?
I think what you see that the first step that organizations takes is that they accept that the complexity is there, and that the complexity is not going to disappear anywhere. So rather than fighting it, as leading organizations, what you do, they are learning to understand what they can do and take advantage of it. And that starts from that perspective with visibility, having systems that basically surface insights instead of trying to bury them in spreadsheets or manual steps. So it's all about creating the insights first. That is absolutely the first step.
So it's less about simplifying the world, right? Because we can't do that as payroll professionals. We just sort of have to respond to it. The more about understanding it, right, JP?
Absolutely. If you take a look in terms of payroll, it can see patterns clearly. Things like overtime spikes, equity gaps, regional cost differences, all those kind of complexity becomes basically a source of intelligence rather than complexity. And when you start to think about the next step, when you have that visibility, it's about connection. When you start to think about how you can basically link payroll data with HR, with finance data, with any other business data, that's when it becomes strategic. Then at the sudden, you are not only just paying people as you described, process the payroll, doing post payroll, all of that. No, you then start to help truly the business understand the talent cost, what the retention risk are, what the productivity drivers are, and basically truly to come with an insight that helps business decisions to be done better.
So JP, my background is as a payroll manager, right? So kind of just getting the payroll out every week or 2 weeks or every month, depending on what the frequency was. So it sounds like this is, as opposed to just the processing side of payroll, right? It's moving it out of just being sort of a back office function and moving it into some of those bigger conversations that are happening around, data strategy and HR strategy, right?
Absolutely. If you in general, for me, payroll has basically everything, the tools and the concept to basically look at complexity, interpret it, and basically move from a reactive approach to basically becoming a strategic partner. If you think about it, average business is paying 40 to 60% of their P&L is related to the people cost. So if you start to move from looking at it purely as a process and executing payroll and paying people in terms of how you can make better the business decisions related to those people costs, I think you have then a seat at the table with which is much more strategic and on a leadership level.
It's a really interesting point, JP. You think about everything that comes to payroll at the end of the day, right? It's your master HR data, it's your tax information, it's now benefits and social insurance, it's now optional programs, the home insurance, as I mentioned, in the United States. It's all of these things are now coming into payroll the more complex it gets. And so I guess, the point you're making is let's use that, right? As opposed to being afraid or having to just manage it and try to get through it. Let's see what we can do to use that data and really provide that upwards to our leadership and say, hey, here's something you may not realize about your spend today or your adoption of some of these programs, right?
Absolutely. And as soon as you start to combine data, not only payroll data, but also the in-depth HR data and in-depth finance data, and you bring that whole together, then you start to build a picture that is going to help leadership to take different type of decisions. So I think there's a huge opportunity there that basically says, don't organize yourself not for dealing with the complexity, embrace the complexity and translate it basically in better insights. And I think that is what I think this is as an opportunity. So perhaps with that, Christian, we can move into I would nearly say a kind of next topic, because what you see is that AI and AI's role in transforming payroll is getting bigger, and there's more reference to it. So let's talk about AI. It's on everyone's agenda right now, but in practical terms, how is AI going to really changing the way we look at payroll and payroll teams, and what can be done today? What's your view on that?
I mean, it's front of mind for everyone, I'm sure. I use it in my personal life, right? I use AI, whether it's, just a language model or helping me with my job too, right? We have AI at Strata that we use every day for my own productivity, to support our clients, et cetera. And every single earnings call, for publicly traded companies that I sit on, it has to come up, right? You have to talk about your AI strategy. What was interesting is connecting it back to what we were just talking about with the complexity and leaning into that, JP. It's really having your foundational data layer be there and understanding and again accepting and trying to take advantage of the fact you have all this data in your payroll today, right? And how do you use that and having everything in one data layer in your payroll files, your reconciliation reports, et cetera, your GL files, having all of that in one place, right, in your payroll. You can now use AI to apply to that foundational data layer that you have, and that can, really change how you do some of the analytics around this, right? So AI is like it's here, right? It's finally coming into. We're seeing it more and more in our payroll processes and our payroll technologies, and it's starting to really take on some of the heavy lifting, which is exciting for me as a payroll person. It gets me out of having to spend so much of my day just running payroll or running error reports or running reconciliation reports. The AI can kind of take some of that day-to-day, kind of slog of work off of my plate. And it's not to say that work completely goes away, but then I can focus in on, okay, what are the errors? What are the issues? What are the places where I can apply more of my analytical brain as opposed to just kind of day-to-day processing or downloading from Excel and then pushing it into a macro and then taking it back and going back into the payroll system and editing something. AI can really help automate a lot of those kind of day-to-day tasks that aren't super fun. They're important, but then it leaves me as a payroll professional more time in my day to dig into the actual, what is the root cause of this issue? What is happening upstream or what might hit downstream in finance systems and GL systems? It gives me more time in my day to be able to do those kinds of things. So, now that countries have stabilized their regulations and digitized a lot of the reporting, it also means AI can automate some of these repetitive tasks, in the post-payroll side as well. So that used to take a lot of time. I think just getting the payroll processed through the gross to net engine takes some time. But then now with more digitization and it's kind of simpler, especially in some of the countries we reviewed in Asia Pac, simpler reporting requirements in some areas or just faster ways to do some of that reporting. Even some of those post-payroll tasks used to take like hours and multiple steps, validating data and checking anomalies and preparing your compliance outputs and all that can sometimes go away, or at least significantly reduce the amount of time and they take to make sure you do them accurately.
So if I listen carefully to you, it's not only cutting down the manual admin task of it, but also quite some process steps that normally happens in the post-payroll process. For example, interpreting data, which is quite often a challenge as well in terms of how you deal with let's say the controls in place, and basically making that in an easier way. Is that my right observation?
I think so. And what I would say, JP, just to take it to the next level is what does AI enable for me, right? So again, I think about all the manual work that I may have had to do in the past. So what does AI, by taking that work off my plate, what does it enable me to do more of, right? So when AI can handle all that data, all the analytics and all the error handling and identification, anomaly detection, doing that at scale, and frankly, just doing it way faster than the human being can do it, it allows payroll professionals like myself to focus on the interpretation side I was just talking about, like the judgment, the context, the upstream research, the root cause analysis, and ultimately that's a lot of error resolution side of things, but even just the business insights, right? So I can now take payroll data and the time I was spending of maybe just trying to resolve an issue, run an off cycle, get somebody paid. Now I can reinvest that time into business insights, right? And say, hey, these are things that we may not have realized about our 40 to 60% spend, right? JP, that you were just talking about. So AI replaces manual repetitive tasks, does it with speed and scale, but it doesn't replace payroll expertise. It really, in my view, it amplifies what I'm able to do, what my team's able to do. And so if you get that combination of AI doing stuff faster, simplifying processes, and just getting through the data side of it faster, and presenting those insights to me to be able to actually take my payroll expertise and apply it to whatever those insights or data points might be. It's that combination. It's going to make your payroll more accurate at the end of the day, but also more proactive and again more strategic, right? I can now go to my financial leadership and say, hey, here's are things that I may not have been able to just see before, but now with the use of AI and the application of my payroll knowledge and understanding root cause and understanding what's the macro level driving some of these things for our organization or for just globally speaking for all companies, it can help me be a little more strategic as I'm talking to my leadership.
And if I listen to that and translate it, then AI gives you as a payroll professional basically the briefing room to basically start to think actually forward rather than looking only backwards and looking what happens, starting to more or less look forward to so what's going to happen and how's that going to impact the business. Is that basically what we're driving for?
Exactly. And I can't see the folks on the call, but I would imagine when you said breathing room, JP, as a payroll professional, you go, what do you mean breathing room? I haven't had breathing room in 10 years, right? So to your point, yes, it's giving you just that moment to pause and take a moment and be more strategic. And that's where you can add a ton more value than maybe you're able to in a non-AI world.
And fantastic.
So I'm going to take one back to you, JP. And so again, thinking about the context of increasing complexity, somewhat stabilizing, but still there. And then now this AI, moment we were just discussing, right, of how it's front of mind for every organization, every CEO, CFO, COO, CIO. So bring all that together for us, JP. Why is now the moment, when organizations need to rethink their payroll strategy?
If I take a look in terms of my 25 years in the payroll industry, this is the first time that I see, first of all, a certain level of stability in terms of regulations and what's going on. But at the same time, there's an opportunity that reporting requirements are going to getting more aligned across the market and more automation capabilities. The digitalization that we can apply today is improving accuracy. And if you take a look in terms of what AI is bringing table and getting mature enough to have truly an impact on our roles and how we execute basically the work that we need to perform, I think because of the technology side of the house, the complexity that is at least stabilizing and in some markets even reducing, and we have a better opportunity to automate not only the reporting but also the understanding of that. This is the moment to rethink about, okay, what do we do from a payroll strategy perspective? And I'm engaged in many leading organizations, and many of them are now stepping back and saying, okay, what does that mean from my organization perspective if I think about payroll and how my payroll teams are organized, how we operate, how we work, and how our situation will grow and change.
So it sounds like, with the maturation of AI particularly, right, but also just kind of the stabilization with more digitalization, et cetera, we're now not experimental, right? So it sounds like the landscape is truly ready to embrace some of these changes, and companies should start to think about that in the payroll strategy, right, JP?
Absolutely. And what you see is that when we talked about payroll a few years ago, that was all about being compliant and being accurate and all of that and on time. That is moving. If I take a look to new roles that I see starting in payroll organizations, it's much more on insights, on how does it contribute to the workforce planning side of the house? How do we get as a company truly cost control on the people cost of the side of the house? How do we make sure that we get the retention on the people cost side where it matters and help us to grow and scale our business? So when companies start to rethink payroll now, it's clearly connected to how HR and finance is organized and processed and basically performed in terms of bringing those worlds together and bringing on that a whole level of automation, improve visibility, and basically trying to use that people cost insight to a competitive advantage. And with that, quite some organizations, leading organizations, are now looking to model the future cost moving forward and understand what risks come to that from a talent perspective and what that means from a financial impact perspective, and to see also where benefits are not landing, where are people not taking the view of what they get to bring to the table and how that will bound that talent. So when you start to combine HR, finance, payroll data, and add to that, and I've seen it in the chats as well, the true in-depth understanding of time data and benefits data, which is a huge amount of data, and use their AI to understand truly what's going on, I think that has a major change in the way we operate and the way we think. And I think I see many organizations spend the time and the effort to take a look in terms of what does that mean from an organization perspective? What kind of skills do I need? What kind of process do I need? And how do I bring that to real value for the business?
And you mentioned competitive advantage as part of that, right? So what my company's able to do, maybe close our books faster, or be able to understand our spend, and have our CFO be able to understand how we can make investments in a different way. So I guess, JP, what are some of the risks if we don't, kind of charge forward with adopting some of these?
I think if not make yourself ready to adopt those kind of things like the AI and making the payroll function, I would nearly say a forward looking function, but stay in looking backwards, that means they will fall back and stay within a more reactive mode. And I think there's a window of opportunity here where you can create clarity and capability and move forward now. That is potentially going to be done, I would nearly say, and that means you have to go from let's say processing payroll and doing that in terms of leveraging what you do with payroll and understanding what that has as an impact on your people cost. So falling back is the outcome if you wait. I think the organizations that I deal with, they are at this moment truly looking at, okay, what do I do? What's the implications? Learn from it as well, and take that forward. So falling back is what has happened, and you stay in a reactive mode.
Interesting. Well, I'm seeing some action in the chat here, JP. So maybe Melanie, we can just open up our next poll here as we talk about all the things we just mentioned. How confident are you in addressing your payroll complexity in your business, right? Given some of the trends and things around AI we were just discussing.
Okay, so I love all the people saying, what about this country? What about that country? Why isn't that on there? So, but you'll be able to see everything on the Complexity Index report. I've put the link in on the chat, so you can download that, but we will also share that afterwards. But guys, what do you think on this one? How confident are you in addressing payroll complexity in your business? Any JP or just which one do you think might be the top of this one?
I think somewhat, I would probably say we'll win this one. That's what I think.
Okay.
Christian?
Christian, we've lost the slides. Just I'm not sure if you're aware.
Uh-oh, sorry about that.
That's
Let's see if
okay.
I can back out of this. Apologies.
No worries. So while you're doing that, because I'm just conscious of time, I'll end the poll shortly. So if you haven't answered, if you could answer, that'd be fantastic. There you go.
The slides come back up, Mel?
Yeah, they have, yeah. So we were so confident with everything going so smoothly. Just got us at the last minute. Okay, here we go. We've got very at 33%, somewhat at 54%, not very 7%. I would feel more confident with more external help, 5%.
Interesting. That's about what I would expect. What about you, JP?
Yeah, definitely. I indeed, I said somewhat will win. Because I think with all the professionals that we have here in the call, they do the payroll today and they run the payroll today. So they are dealing with the payroll complexity day to day. So I'm sure that you build quite some comfort around it and making sure that you are able to. So yeah, not surprised.
All right. Well, just in the interest of time, JP, maybe we can just kind of wrap up and conclude, right? Some of the things, the main talking points we talked about and kind of actions to take next from here.
Absolutely. So let me wrap up very rapidly. So I think from my perspective, the global payroll requirements are stabilizing, legal changes are easing, the digitization is accelerating. So that gives leaders the space to shift from reactive compliance to proactive insight. So with that, I think we are going to see a more calmer, clear payroll landscape. If you then take a look in terms of AI and automation, will reduce the manual effort. Of course, human judgment remains there to make sure that payroll data is going to be transformed into a meaningful business-wide intelligence support. So with that, technology plus the right expertise, when that comes together, that will drive different outcomes. And last but not least, the integrated payroll and workforce data powers, from my perspective, smarter decisions, from cost forecasting and market planning to talent equity, but also the well-being of the people and more organizational resilience. So payroll as a strategic engine for the C-suite is, I think, what we are heading for. So Christian, and I think that basically kind of help us to say, okay, and how does that look like actioning, and how could that move forward into to action? So perhaps you want to take that on board.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, as we've talked about, kind of some of the complexity is still there, but in stabilization in terms of kind of the volume and the pace of some of these changes, it opens a window for opportunity for all of us, right? So digitalization's advancing, complexity stabilizing. We finally have some good conditions, I would say, as payroll professionals, to simplify running payroll, and unlocking the intelligence within it, right? As we were just discussing, some of that's AI, right? But some of that is just using our expertise and our minds as payroll professionals, but having these AI tools at our fingertips and knowing how to use those in conjunction with our payroll knowledge. So the organizations that are going to move now and try to get ahead of this are going to have a strategic edge, as we mentioned, that competitive advantage, versus kind of waiting, to fall behind and having to catch up later. So what you can do now, right? Audit your current processes, right? So where are those errors happening or delays? There was a comment, I think, in the chat about what are some of those specific use cases. There are payroll technologies now that are either fully, unified as part of an HR and time system, or there are now API connections to have continuously running payrolls, right? So identify, do you have that in place today, right? Is it time to make a technology change? Push your vendors, right, that you might be using today. Say, hey, am I on the latest and greatest? And what AI functions do you have that are available, right? The sooner you identify those errors, or sooner if you identify maybe a gap or something in the process, fixing that, streamlining that, again, gives you, instead of waiting a month to get that error report and then having to go work all those errors, if you can do that in real time as someone is hired, as someone is terminated, that hits the payroll and you can start to see where those errors might come up. It again gets you to just be able to be much more proactive with the error and issue handling, resolve that in real time in the moment, and then you can again be more forward thinking and proactive in the way that you do your work as a payroll professional. So that's just one example, right? A more concrete example, I suppose, of how AI is helping. Again, we're talking about the data layer of this, right? It connects your HR, your finance data, your time data, benefits data, everything that hits payroll at the end of the day. There's so much value that you can potentially unlock there, just with that data layer. Whether you use AI or maybe just use some basic analytics, but obviously, your competitor organizations, your peer payroll organizations are probably going to be applying that AI layer. And so I think now is the time to really go forward with that. And again, looking beyond compliance, right? So it's the forecast scenarios that JP mentioned. It's being able to supply some of that information upstream to your controllership or to your financial leadership, your CFO, your CIO, right? And supporting more strategic decisions and strategic conversations as a payroll professional. And that obviously brings everybody together, right? So payroll sits at this nexus, right, of finance, HR, time, benefits, your people operations day to day. So it's getting everyone, using payroll, frankly, to align everyone on what is the strategy for growth or profitability for your company, whatever those key levers are for where your organization is today. Payroll should have probably a bigger seat at that table than they do today. And it's really unlocking the value of all this data that maybe historically just hasn't been recognized before. And so that's really it, right? Investing in the visibility and the control. Find that platform, find that partner that's going to enable those AI capabilities to give you more time back in your day, to manage this compliance to scale globally, right? So you may have a strategy in place where you've got a really strong partner in one country or region, but you want to expand that more globally, right? So looking at things that are scalable, looking at data models, right, that you're going to be able to apply an AI layer onto that are more than just one particular country, but global. And so with that, Melanie, I know we're on our very last poll, but I don't know if we'll have time to launch this, but just wanted to see from the group, right? We've covered quite a bit today, but what would you think would be most helpful from here? JP and I are looking, we'll give you our LinkedIn profiles as well, but we would love to know from you guys, having learned what we talked about today, what would be most helpful moving forward.
Christian, do you want to just land it on the last slide, just while we're waiting for people to fill in?
Yes, thank you.
There you go. So guys, we obviously we're coming up to the last minute or so, but if you want to get in touch with Christian or JP, we spoke earlier and they're happy for you to contact them directly on LinkedIn, but we also have Strada details here. But what I will do on the email that I send out to everyone who's registered who could and couldn't attend, we'll put all of your links on there so that you have that to hand as well. So it's nice and easy for you guys to get in touch. Perfect.
Thanks, Melanie.
So,
Thanks.
This is really interesting. Yeah. Okay. So I can see the results on these. So, but I'll show them shortly. If you guys haven't filled it in, if you could just quickly do that now, and I'll end the poll in a couple of seconds. Okay. Thank you so much. Here we go. Yeah. People want to see the complexity index, tools or templates to help manage payroll complexity. The demo, that's great news, and one-to-one consultation. So looking good. We've got the webinar. Oh, here we go. And the webinar recap slides for now. Thank you. So we'll get those sent out to everyone. Okay. So thank you so much, Christian and JP. Really interesting. It's great to see that the audience necessarily hasn't changed, but maybe the complexity index has changed slightly. So great to see, and we look forward to seeing the next one and seeing the changes. So thank you so much, both of you.
It was a pleasure. Thanks. Thanks all.
Cheers.
Cheers.